I'm on a mission to turn this coin into a wristwatch, and in today's episode, I finally succeed, or at least get halfway there. But this has been an absolutely epic journey. But first, last time I restarted because I had to make some adjustments. In other words, restart. So I started over using some 5 cent and 1 rand coins. I alternated them, I fused them together, and I created a billet of alternating copper and nickel. And that brings us to today. I'm starting off by just rounding out the edges of this billet because I don't want any inclusions or anything that could lead to potential cracks. And at this point, I'm an expert in cracks. Bad jokes aside, it's time for me to draw this out into a billet. And I'm going to draw this out to the point where it's long enough for me to twist to reveal the pattern some more and re-square so that I have a wavy pattern with the copper and the nickel. And I really greatly underestimated just how much time this would take. As I was forging this piece, I noticed a small seam forming, and it was eventually this piece falling off. So I figured I'd just draw this out and weld it back on at a later stage. I've had to make this material one piece again because I know that this is not going to be enough material. So here you can see the weld. I've cleaned it up, made sure it's as flat as I can get it. I've been working on this project for about 2.5 months now, and I really don't regret it at all because I want this to be something that I'm proud of. Something I can look at and think, wow, I actually made that from a coin. And I want it to be fascinating. So if you think that this is a project that's worthwhile, if you think that this is something that you would enjoy, and if you think that this video is worth your time, consider subscribing. And if you're on the fence about it, wait till the end to see the end result. And maybe that might just change your mind. I'm kind of new to this YouTube thing, so if you have any advice, any tips, or any way I can make this even better for you, please let me know down below. As I'm drawing this out, I'm just making sure I'm carrying it as long as possible so that I have maximum material, and when I twist it, it doesn't end up being super short. I want this to show the pattern and not to make it necessarily shorter. I'm also making sure to cool this down nice and slow inside the forge because it makes sure that the material is as soft as possible before I go and twist it. And you can see the final length before twisting. It's quite straight and square right now, but I'm going to turn this into a much more interesting pattern. And that's going to be done by twisting. What this does is it turns the layers of copper and nickel from the sides of the billet and distributes it throughout the billet, so that when I go out and square it back up, the pattern runs across the entire piece instead of just on one side. I'm doing this so slowly and doing it at a temperature that's quite hot, because if this thing starts to crack right now, it's going to be a real disaster. I want to make sure that this stays quite hot because as I'm turning it, it's going to slowly start tearing, and I want these tears to be as small as possible. And here you can see the cracks on the surface. In this case, it's not so bad because I'm going to grind it out and then flatten it out again, but if I go too aggressively on the twist, it might end up ruining the entire billet and cutting all the way through. And here we have a nice and clean billet that's going to be re-squared. So I'm doing this the same way as you've seen me before, getting it nice and red hot and just whacking on it until it gets to a roughly square shape. I'm aiming for a 10 by 8 millimeter square bar, and I want this to be drawn out slightly further to what it is now because I have a feeling that this is going to be a very close cut in terms of how much material I actually need versus how much I actually have. I'm also going past the grinder and just making sure that all those surfaces, or all the scale on the surfaces, are ground out so that I can see that epic pattern. In terms of design, I want to keep this quite simple. I want it to be as elegant as possible, and I want this to be reminiscent of classic dress watches, but with a much more modern twist on it. And so I'm roughly drawing a sketch where normally I would have a full 3D model and spend months and so many hours just perfecting every aspect of the design. In this case, I'm just gonna take it as it comes and just sort of enjoy the build, because I don't get the chance to sort of freelance and just to do this impromptu without any exact planning. And so I have the rough idea in my head, and I'm gonna slowly start making it into that shape. Over here you can see my excellent camera work, where I failed to show you what I'm actually doing, but in this shot you can see it a lot clearer. I'm basically bending this to a circle, and then once it gets to a rough shape, I'll fuse the ends together and then forge it and refine it into a much more rounded shape. From there, I'll machine that by hand to make two separate pieces, one for the bezel, one for the case, and turn that into what will eventually be the case. Of course, there's also lugs to think about, but you'll see what I do later on in the video. I'm just taking my time and getting this to a rough circle, and I want to do this as carefully as possible to not crack the material and to make sure it's roughly circular. Then off camera I will turn this into a more refined shape. I do a lot of work off camera because sometimes the things that I do on these pieces are not very interesting to watch, and the parts that I do film are the parts that I think show what's happening and shows what the interesting parts of the build is. So I've got this roughly round. I did some work off camera so that I could get it rounded. You can see it's not perfect, definitely not, but I've also trimmed off this edge. I just started soldering this using actual silver solder, but I figured it would be better if I fused the ends together just by getting it to forge welding temperatures and then clamping it together, or at least pushing it together with enough force that the ends fuse. And this was definitely the correct way, because I ended up with an extremely seamless fit between the parts, and you can't see it at all in the finished product. I'm just facing off one side of this piece so that I have a reference to work off, and I'll use this side as a reference for all the other grinding that I'm gonna do. Starting out, I'm just gonna get this roughly circular, and I'm gonna use this as sort of a base to cut against, if that makes any sense. I'm gonna separate this into the bezel and the case. I'm also roughening out the inside just to have more or less a circle, and I want to make sure I can see the material to see if there's any big issues like cracks or gaps or inclusions, but so far it's not that bad. Although there are a few issues, I can definitely grind those out. Working on the inside and the sides, you can finally start to see that pattern, and it looks really cool, but it's going to look even better in future. Here I'm marking out the line where I'm going to cut, and I'm using a hacksaw to cut the bezel out of this piece so that I have two separate pieces. The reason why I'm doing this is because this is going to form two separate components, and even though in the end they will be fused together, this needs to be machined separately because I'm going to have threads in one piece and plain holes in another. So having it as separate pieces is just much easier than machining these two together. Off camera, I just forged out this piece in the exact same way that you just saw. I stacked some coins up, forged it out into a square, I twisted it, and I forged it flat again. Now this one has a lot more aggressive of a twist to it, and the pattern looks absolutely amazing. It's very reminiscent of Damascus steel, and it has sort of like a wavy pattern to it, and I really like the way it looks. So I'm chopping it up into 4 pieces, and this will form the lugs of the watch. This will be attached to the main case only, and I'll be soldering it in place. But before I can put it in place, I need to make some grooves inside the case, and this is where the lugs will fit into. Of course, this was quite a tricky process, and on camera you see me just roughing out the edge, but I must have filed this for at least 3 or 4 hours just to make sure I get a fit that's perfect, and that when I solder it eventually, you won't see any of the seams. And I think I got it almost 99% there, but obviously off camera I did a lot more work. I also polished up that edge. Since the case was already in this shape, it was so easy to polish. I polished it up so that I have a nice finish to work off in future. I used some epoxy to attach this first and then shape it, but in hindsight I should have soldered this from the start. It would have saved me some time. I can't quite decide between having sharp edges on the lugs or having rounded edges on the lugs. So let me know in the comments down below which one you think is your favorite, and I'll change it from there. I'm using the belt, the bench, and the Dremel grinder to shape the lugs into what I want, but I'll keep those edges nice and sharp for now until this video is out, and then see what you guys think. I'm refining this by hand as well, because I want this to have a nice gentle curve to it that reflects the general aesthetic of the watch. I also got a surprise visitor as I was building this. I'm just going to remove some material from the inside of the watch to make space for all the components that go inside. The way this is going to work is that there's going to be holes drilled inside the main case and threads cut inside the bezel. The case back will then attach into those components with screws, which will hold everything together. It sounds kind of complicated now, but once I show you in the next video, you'll understand. I'm going to repeat the exact same process for the bezel, and this is going to make space for the crystal. This measurement is extremely important, of course, because the bezel of the crystal will attach to the bezel using a small gasket, and if this is off by even a fraction of a millimeter, the watch isn't going to be waterproof. This is really starting to take shape right now, and I'm so glad at the result already. It's starting to look like an actual watch, and to think that this came from a coin is actually quite incredible. I'm going to round out the edge of this bezel, and I want a nice domed effect, so I'm using the bench and belt grinder as usual to get a nice rounded edge. And while I'm here, I'm just going to attach this onto a arbor, which is going to spin this, and I can use it to polish it up on the belt grinder, which just saves me a bit of time later on. The case back of this watch is going to have a display so that you can see the movement on the inside. And those dots you see are where the screw holes are going to be drilled, and they will attach through the case and into the bezel. This is a case back that I already made for a previous watch, but I didn't end up using it, so I didn't end up filming making this case back. But in the next video, you will see more details about the case back. I'm doing a preliminary finish on all the parts, just to get out any surface scratches and to make sure that the final finishing goes a lot more smoother. As I was going through this, I started looking at the pattern of this, and I think it looks absolutely amazing. I really can't believe that this came from coins, and it actually boggles my mind. But you be the judge of just how good this case actually is. This watch was made from this coin, and you can see what an epic journey it's been. I'm so pleased with the results so far, but this is only the start, and it just gets better from here. In the next episode, we're looking at the inside of the watch, the dial, which is going to be amazing, and all the other parts that turn this into one of the most amazing things I've ever made. So make sure you subscribe for that, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks.